Why D&D 6th edition should ditch skills altogether. Today on Dungeon Craft. Welcome to Dungeon Craft. I'm Professor Dungeonmaster, and this channel is about playing the ultimate game of D&D. So Nate on our Dungeon Craft Facebook group put a link to this article on cbr.com by Nicholas Howe, D&D 6th edition, 5 things fans want and 5 things that make people worry. Wizards of the Coast says there is no 6th edition in the planning stages, which means secretly they are working hard on a 6th edition. But it's a pretty good article. I agree for the most part with the author Nate Howe and also the ideas that the fans have. But there's one sticking point that I disagree with it, and that is the point of skills. He asks for more defined skills. He writes, players want to jump across a ravine and the DM asks them to roll an acrobatics or athletics check. That makes sense. But when you get into the more niche checks, you start running into problem. The only 2 skills that have been given clear definitions are perception and investigations, since they are the most used. Other skills like medicine, history, and survival are just thrown in by the DM in places where they think they would go. It would be nice to have more in-depth explanations. I have no doubt that most players probably agree with Nicholas, but I'll be honest, I think it's a terrible idea, which is why I'm wearing my +1 vest of protection today. Sometimes things that players think they want really aren't a good idea, and skills is one of those things. First of all, survival gets 3 entire pages in the Dungeonmaster's guide. I mean, we learn about weather conditions, geographical locations, and foraging. Granted, it's not in the player's handbook, but still. Now, Arcana, to me, it's pretty straightforward. See, skills are a rabbit hole. The more you define them, the more people are going to ask for more definitions and different levels to the skills and skill points. I'm reminded of the Rolemaster RPG from the 1980s where there's like over 100 skills, and if someone was poisoned, you didn't just have medicine like in D&D 5th edition. You had diagnostics and poison lore so that you could see exactly what was wrong with the person, diagnose it properly, and then see if you could guess which poison it was. And it just slowed down the game. And one of the young designers on the Rolemaster team was Monty Cook, who went on to design Dungeons & Dragons, and now he's designed Numenera, which is a skill-less role-playing game. Because as designers evolve, they start to realize something. The idea that you can replicate how humans learn and how humans think and make some sort of uniform game system that can simultaneously cover swinging a sword, playing the lute, and casting magic spells is just ridiculous. I'm going to invoke Tracy Hickman's law of game design here. The more realistic you try to make your game, the more unwieldy and unplayable it becomes. I think 6th edition D&D would be better off by just creating a suite of skills, a range of expertise that goes with the character's profession and gives them a plus to whatever the D20 roll is. I'm a big fan of this OSR book, The Black Hack, and in it, a rogue has roguish talents that give him advantage with the following actions: delicate tasks, climbing, listening and eavesdropping, moving silently and unseen, understanding written languages, finding secret things. I love the language of finding secret things and delicate tasks. It's precise enough to give you a good idea of what it is without being so specific that you're pigeonholing the character, like a delicate task. I imagine it's something like picking a lock or picking a pocket, or being suspended from a rope and plucking a Fabergé egg out of a web of laser alarms. In my own game, Eldritch, a rules-light horror RPG based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft, which has nothing in common with another popular RPG based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft, I use a very simple skill system. There's only one skill, and it's called skill. It's measured on a scale of 1 to 6, 6 being the best. And when you roll a skill test and you perform a skill that's in your character's profession's wheelhouse, so to speak, you add that skill level to the D20 roll. So, for example, if there's an archaeologist, I assume they know how to read ancient Egyptian, work with a little brush and magnifying glass. That's all in there. If your character is a private eye, they know how to drive a car, tail someone, punch someone in the face, and use a firearm. It makes logical sense, and that's what I'm counting on, the Game Master to just use logical sense to make a reasonable decision and assign a reasonable target number to the task. Shadow of the Demon Lord is a game that comes up frequently on the Facebook group and Patreon pages, and it's got a pretty innovative skill system. It's a D20 system, and a character will have a profession and a background, so you can be a warrior, an orc warrior. But they also have a previous profession. Let's say our orc warrior was a whaler. The characters are at sea and a sudden squall hits and the captain or pilot is washed overboard and someone needs to pilot the ship into harbor around these rocks. Well, a character that has a whaling background, they could make a case that, yeah, that's probably in my character's wheelhouse of skills. I should get a boon. On the other hand, if the character was a farmer, the Game Master can say, well, you're a landlubber, you get a bane, you don't know your way around ships. This is a wonderful system. It is really versatile, it's simple, and it uses dice, and more dice are always fun. Now, I don't use it myself because I play with younger players, and rolling a 17 and subtracting 4 is like a major operation. And my older players, I refer to them as first edition. They're more than first edition. They're like 0 edition. They've got dice that look like this. I mean, this is the size of a golf ball. It's just a few beats too long. Plus, at the Matrix level, if we get into deep game design, it's really a Penn and Teller level of misdirection, right? Because in rules-like games, generally it's like, well, you need a 15 to hit the orc. Oh, you're 5th level? Okay, you need a 10. But some players aren't happy with that. They want more crunch than that. So the Banes and Boons thing turns lowering the target number into a randomizer, and the players are now concentrating on this cool mechanic instead of the Game Master being in charge of everything. And for some reason, that's more comfortable for players, but saying a test has a target number of 14, but you get to roll this and add it is the same thing as saying the target number is 10. And by the same thing, I mean it's in an insignificant margin of error. Most of the time when we roll dice, we roll either far above the number or far below. It's very seldom that you'll roll exactly what you need. Ultimately, Black Hack, Eldritch, and Shadow of the Demon Lord are doing exactly what Nicholas Howe says. The skills are just thrown in by the DM in places where they think they should go. But I would make the argument that that's really the only way you could do it, because you really can't make a system that replicates human thought. Now, skill acquisition, that's a little bit more of a challenge, and for that I turn to Josh Kaufman, who wrote a great book called The First 20 Hours, Mastering the Toughest Part of Learning Anything. I'm going to include a link to his TED Talk below. Kaufman explores the Malcolm Gladwell outliers theory that you need about 10,000 hours of practice to be an expert at something. And Kaufman doesn't doubt that, but he wonders, how long does it take not to be an expert at a skill, but just be competent? And he comes to the conclusion that cognitive science says about 20 hours, and he proves it by learning how to play the ukulele. When we first learn a skill, we can make tremendous gains very quickly, then that skill level is going to plateau. It's the difference between you having no miniature painting skill and being pretty good. But the difference between you and Sarastro is going to be huge. And by the way, that is a great painting channel. So if your barbarian wants to play the lute and has someone like a bard to teach him, they can learn it in about 20 hours. It doesn't require skill points to be assigned. They just know how to do it competently, which would mean when they roll the d20, they don't get a negative or disadvantage. Some skills, like spellcasting, are different because they're based on forbidden lore. There must be some sort of hierarchy of mages, making sure that not just anyone can cast flame arrow or fireball spells, because fire was a major killer in cities during the Middle Ages. I also imagine that the Lexile level for spellbooks and scrolls would be very high, and probably in an ancient language as well. That's a skill that demands prerequisite skills and building on them, which is why not everybody can learn how to cast spells. Cognitive science is a very new field. We are only now really starting to do MRIs and figuring out what happens when people are thinking, what happens when they're dreaming, what happens when they're meditating or praying. We don't have all the answers. Human beings don't really know how we learn skills exactly. So no role-playing game can ever hope to replicate that. But that's okay, because to play a game, we just don't need that level of detail. Ultimately, A game master's just got to make a decision about a difficulty, and part of the social contract is the players will abide by it. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. Also below, you'll find links to our Dungeoncraft Facebook group and our Patreon page, where all members at all tiers can get access to the beta version of Eldritch for just $2, and it's completely compatible with all other Lovecraftian role-playing games. That's a real bargain. This has been Professor Dungeonmaster for Dungeoncraft. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next week, and until then, may all your saves be 20s.
Deathbringer again. Click on these videos for more Dungeoncraft, instead of doing whatever it is you're supposed to be doing, working remotely.